I never believed in love at first sight. Not really. It always sounded like something out of the novels I kept stacked by my bed, their covers soft and worn from being read too many times. But then again, so much of life seems impossible until it is staring at you, unblinking, demanding to be acknowledged. That was how it felt the morning I met Daniel. It was late spring, the kind of morning when the city seemed to hum with possibility. The air was warm enough that I had shed my jacket, and I could feel the sunlight settling gently on my skin. I was walking to my favorite cafe, tucked away in a side street that smelled faintly of roasted beans and fresh croissants. I remember adjusting the strap of my bag, distracted by a song playing in my headphones, when I bumped, hard, into someone rounding the corner. Books scattered to the pavement. Not mine, his. He knelt quickly, murmuring apologies, and I dropped beside him, my hands brushing against the worn spine of a poetry collection as I helped gather them. When our eyes met, something inside me shifted. His were a deep, thoughtful shade of brown, flecked with gold where the sunlight caught them. He smiled, sheepishly, as though he was embarrassed by the mess. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice warm and unhurried, like the first sip of coffee on a cold day. "It's my fault," I replied, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. For a moment, neither of us moved, just crouched there in the middle of the sidewalk, surrounded by scattered books and the faint laughter of strangers passing by. It felt strangely intimate, as if the city had decided to pause and wait for us. He introduced himself. "Daniel. A student of literature," he explained, always carrying more books than his arms could handle. I told him my name, feeling shy but curious, and he said it back to me like he was testing the sound, as though it belonged in a poem. By the time we had gathered his things, he had asked if I was heading to the cafe just ahead. I nodded, and he smiled again, the kind of smile that felt like an invitation. We walked together, and I was struck by how easy it was, how natural it felt. He spoke about his favorite writers, and I found myself listening as if every word mattered. I confessed my habit of writing in notebooks I never shared with anyone, and instead of laughing, he looked at me like he understood. By the time we reached the cafe, it was as if we had known each other longer than a few blocks. He held the door open for me, and I stepped inside, my heart racing in a way I couldn't quite explain. Something in me whispered that this moment would matter, though I didn't yet know how. As we ordered our coffee, I found myself hoping he would sit with me, stay a little longer, let this accidental meeting unfold into something more. Daniel was the first to speak after what felt like an eternity of silence, his voice low and strained as if he feared the trees themselves might be listening. He said we should leave the stone alone and turn back immediately, but Emily protested, her eyes shining with a mix of curiosity and excitement, insisting that this was exactly why adventures were worth taking, to stumble upon things no one else had seen. I stood between them, torn by the weight of Daniel's caution and the spark in Emily's words, my own heart racing faster with every second we lingered near the carved rock. The symbols seemed to draw me in, twisting slightly as though alive, and though I told myself it was only my imagination, I could not look away. Finally, I reached out and touched the cool, damp surface. The instant my fingers brushed the stone, a sharp shiver ran through me, as if the forest air had turned to ice. Emily gasped and leaned closer, asking if I had felt that, but Daniel pulled me back with more force than I expected, his hand gripping my arm tightly. He was pale, and his jaw was clenched, and he muttered that something about this place was wrong. For once, I didn't argue. We tried to retrace our steps, choosing what we thought was the same direction we had come from, but the forest felt different now, unfamiliar and warped, each tree too much like the last, every path splitting into another. The light shifted strangely too, as though the sun no longer moved in its natural arc but instead filtered down in beams that led us deeper rather than back. After an hour, frustration began to crack through Emily's optimism. She stopped laughing, stopped humming, and instead asked over and over if we were lost. Daniel didn't answer. He only walked faster, the flashlight bouncing against his backpack, though it was still daylight. I knew he was thinking of nightfall, and so was I. As we pushed forward, the silence pressed heavier against us, until the faint sound of running water reached our ears. Relieved, we followed it, believing that a stream could lead us somewhere familiar. The sight of water glinting between the trees lifted our spirits, But as we drew closer, we realized the stream was unlike any I had seen before. Its surface shimmered with a faint silver glow, as though reflecting a moon that was not yet in the sky. Emily knelt to touch it, her hand hovering just above the surface, but Daniel stopped her again, his voice sharp, almost angry now, telling her not to. She rolled her eyes, but even she seemed unsettled by the unnatural gleam of the water. We filled our bottles anyway, too thirsty not to, and I couldn't shake the thought that maybe Daniel was right, maybe everything here was not meant for us. As we continued along the stream, hoping it would lead out, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The stone symbols we had seen earlier were carved again, faintly, along the rocks near the bank, half hidden by moss and mud. It was as though the markings followed us, repeating endlessly like a secret language written by the forest itself. Emily tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked, and I knew she felt it too, the sensation that the forest was alive and aware of us. By the time the sun began to dip lower, shadows stretching long and cold across the ground, we still had not found a way out. Every direction felt wrong, and when I turned back toward the stream, it no longer flowed the way I thought it had, curving in the opposite direction, as the days that followed blurred into one another, strung together like pearls on a fragile thread. Daniel and I met often, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes wandering through quiet streets, sometimes in the park where the city gave way to trees and silence. Each time, I felt as though I was stepping deeper into something I had never dared to dream of, a closeness, a tenderness, a sense of being seen. He read me poetry aloud in that calm, thoughtful voice of his, and I found myself writing more than ever. Lines spilled across my notebooks, inspired by the way the sunlight touched his hair, by the curve of his smile, by the weight of his hand when it finally found mine and stayed there. I told no one about him. It felt like our secret, something too delicate to expose to the chatter of friends or family. One evening, he invited me to his apartment. I hesitated, not out of fear, but because it felt like stepping across a boundary, from the soft glow of possibility into something more tangible. Still, I went. His building was old, tucked between newer ones, with ivy creeping up its walls. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and rain-soaked stone. When he opened the door, I was surprised by how bare it was inside. No photographs, no clutter, just shelves lined with books and a single lamp casting a warm pool of light. "It's not much," he said, almost apologetically. "It feels peaceful," I told him. And I meant it. We sat together, side by side on his worn sofa. He handed me a book of poems, asked me to read to him. My voice trembled at first, but when I glanced up, he was watching me, not with judgment but with something deeper, something that made my chest ache. "You make the words sound alive," he whispered. Later, as the night grew darker, I realized how quiet the world outside had become. It was as if time had folded in on itself again, leaving only the two of us suspended in that dimly lit room. I felt both safe and restless, as though something unseen was waiting just beyond the edges of the moment. "Daniel," I said softly, "sometimes I feel like I've known you forever. Isn't that strange?" He looked at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, but it wasn't the smile I had come to know. It was sad, almost tender in its sorrow. "It's not strange," he murmured. "Because you have known me before." The words unsettled me, though his voice was steady. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but before I could, he reached out and touched my hand. His skin was cold, colder than it should have been. "I've waited a long time for you," he said. "Every lifetime, I find you. And every lifetime, you leave me behind." I stared at him, heart racing, unable to speak. His eyes, so warm and familiar, seemed suddenly endless, filled with centuries of unspoken memory. And then the lamp flickered. For just an instant, in the stuttering light, I saw him differently, not as Daniel, but as a shadow, a figure both ancient and fragile, eyes too wide, smile too sorrowful. When the light steadied, he was himself again. He looked at me with a quiet certainty and whispered, "This time, don't run."